Hi everyone, this is part 52 of ABAT Exam Preparation Series. There are only a few parts left and the main competency standard, the main ABAT exam preparation will be over. So now we are at the components of operational definitions. Operational definitions are basically the definitions through which we will be explaining the behaviors and any other thing, any skill, any requirement, any target behavior. And so operational definitions are supposed to be in a way that even if someone has not seen the behavior and they are simply reading the operational definition of that behavior, they can imagine exactly how the behavior occurred. So you are basically creating the imagination. You are basically describing the behavior in a way that the behavior can be exactly imagined, exactly be perceived how it occurred. So you have to cover basically all the aspects of the behavior occurred or the target behavior. Now we are working on components of operational definitions. So what should be the components of operational definitions in terms of defining them in a right way? Basically, okay, so you have to define some behaviors when you are working on skill acquisition plans or you are working on behavior reduction plans. You have to define the behavior. That's why you need to know the components of operational definitions. Operational definition itself is a clear, objective, and measurable description of a behavior, ensuring consistency in data collection and analysis. It defines exactly what a behavior looks like so that different observers can identify and measure it reliably. Okay, so the first one is objectivity. It has to be clear and observable. You are not supposed to include your assumptions, your interpretations, or emotions when you are describing the behavior. You have to describe what you observed. You have to simply explain the observable part of the behavior. For example, instead of defining aggression as acting out of anger, like how can you assume that he acting out of anger or what could be the function behind the behavior? You simply have to define it as hitting, kicking, or pushing another person with force. So you are providing the definition in which you are providing the observable aspect, not the assumed or interpreted aspect. Measurability, quantifiable. So the behavior should be defined in a way that allows for consistent measurement. It could be frequency, duration, intensity, or latency. We will be covering these parts, but basically, you have to define the behavior that you could measure it. Like frequency is the number of counts the behavior occurred, duration is for how long. You have to define it in a way that you can quantify it, you can measure it. Example, a tantrum is defined as crying, screaming, and lying on the floor for at least 30 seconds. So this is the operational definition you have provided for tantrum. You will be define it like this, that the crying, screaming, and lying on the floor was included in that behavior of that specific client, and it occurred for at least 30 seconds. So you're basically explaining the quantity, you are basically explaining the frequency, duration, intensity, or latency, any measurable aspect of that behavior in your operational definition as well. Specificity, clear and unambiguous. The definition should clearly differentiate the target behavior from similar behaviors. Like there could be multiple behaviors occurring in the same way. You have to differentiate the target behavior. You have to differentiate it from similar behaviors. For example, hand flapping is defined as rapid movement of the hands back and forth in the air, occurring at least 3 times in a 10-second interval. Basically, you gave an observable aspect here, you gave the quantifiable aspect here, and then you also gave unambiguous, clear explanation of that behavior. You explained how hand flapping occurred, and you are basically differentiating it from the other behavior by clearly explaining the complete aspect. Now next is inclusion and exclusion criteria. Inclusion defines what is considered part of the behavior, and exclusion clarifies what is not considered part of the behavior to avoid confusion. Like for example, if you have given an operational definition, people might can add similar or different behaviors within that. They can assume other parts of the behavior within that. So this way they will have an idea that what is included and what is excluded. For example, self-injurious behavior SIB includes biting one's own arm hard enough to leave a mark, but does not include rubbing the arm without leaving a mark. So you gave exclusion criteria, you gave inclusion criteria as well. Specifies when and where the behavior occurs if applicable. Let's specify what happens before the behavior occurs or how the situation is triggered or where the behavior occurred in what environment it is occurring. So you are basically providing the context, you are explaining the relevant situation. For example, verbal aggression is defined as yelling insults directed at others during social interactions, excluding playful teasing. So you have given relevant situation as well, that is the social interactions. So you have to include these multiple aspects, multiple components to your operational definition of behavior. Coming towards the MCQs, which of the following best describes an operational definition in ABA? A clear, objective and measurable description of behavior. Which component of an operational definition ensures that different observers can measure the behavior consistently? Objectivity. An operational definition states that tantrums include crying, screaming, and lying on the floor for at least 30 seconds. Which component does this definition demonstrate? Specificity. Why is it important to include exclusion criteria in an operational definition? To ensure behaviors that look similar are not mistakenly recorded. Which of the following is the best operational definition for aggression? Aggression includes physical action such as hitting, kicking, or pushing another person with force. That's all for today. Thank you for watching.